Salutations everyone, this is Razor bringing you guys an Overwatch video here today talking about the responses lately to frustrations with Overwatch, or what the meta is now, or competitive play, how ranked is bad. We've seen a lot of these videos recently. There was that really popular Seagull video where he talked about the state of the game, and then Jane reviewed it and had XQC and Surefour and Seagull on, and there's a lot of other big YouTubers out there who talk about these sort of things and air their grievances, their frustrations, what they want to happen, what they don't like in the game, what they want to see changed. And then obviously we have Ash, who's going to be in the game now, who I don't think we could really put into the conversation of how she'll impact the game, because we won't know until she's in comp. PTR and quick play mean absolutely nothing. It's impossible to tell what kind of impact she'll have. When Brigitte came out, everyone said, oh, she's garbage, she's trash, she sucks, on the PTR. And, she's kind of fun, blah, blah, blah. She's easy to play, but it's not going to be good. And then she comes out in quick play and arcade, and they said, nah, she's not very good. Her heals suck. And then she comes out in comp, and now she's the scapegoat for Overwatch, is Brigitte Lindholm. She's the absolute scapegoat. Pro players, pro teams, huge personalities on YouTube and Twitch. A lot of them, with the whole delete Brig movement, is part of it. A lot of them have latched onto the idea that Brigitte is the problem in Overwatch because of stuns and CCs and how hard it is to be Ryan and goats and all this stuff, and one-shot combos, which is something that I find myself really struggling getting a handle on. Is a lot of the complaints about Brigitte. Just because based off of the past and the things that people are saying, and one of them is, you can't play Tracer anymore because she'll one-shot you. Oh, you can't play this way anymore because she'll one-shot you. Oh, you can't dive on her because she'll one-shot you. And it's like, Brigitte does not have a one-shot kill capability. All right, there's only one character that can do that, and that's headshotting Widow on squishies. That's the only one-shot kill in the game. Brigitte does not have that. And when they talk about one-shotting, it's actually a 3 or 4 shot, right? It's either bash whip, bash mace whip, or mace bash mace whip, right? It's like, do these people not know how to counter 3? Pro players, people with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, they're like, Brigitte's one-shotting. Her one-shot is just too good. How is it a one-shot if you need 3 moves to do it? People are terrible at counting, obviously. And yes, I know Doomfist has the ability to one-shot somebody, with an ability, with one punch. And people have problems with Doomfist, and obviously Doomfist isn't really an issue in the top level of play on the scene. In Overwatch League, we saw very, very little Doomfist. A couple of times Surefour or Hydration would pop off. One on Gibraltar comes to mind, but never did a Doomfist dictate a game. And the meta shifts and everything, and we have right now the 3 main comp strategies. You have GOATS, triple tank, triple healer, obviously specific tanks and specific healers. If you go into like a matchmaking game, even if it's like Masters or Grandmasters, some people are like, hey, let's play GOATS, and they just pick Zarya, Roadhog, Orisa, and Lucio, Zen, Mercy. It's like, you're not even on the same page. You're not even close. And you have Dive, right? What we all knew as the meta for much of the first season of the Overwatch League, and variants of that. Different characters shifting into play and support and DPS. And then you have anti-dive, which, you have McCree, you have Brigitte, and, Doomfist in there, and Sombra are kind of the most talked about DPS options right now, especially the highest level of play. But even in the highest level of play, like if you watch the World Cup, Doomfists were not carrying fights. They were not doing the things that you see them do in competitive, right? Where a Doomfist can take over a game in Platinum, in Diamond, in Masters, and Grandmasters. A Doomfist can by himself give so much value or take away so much value from the enemy team that you can, in a sense, during some fights, especially the lower in the SR you go, to carry a team. Now, during the conversation with Seagull and Jane and Surefour, mostly because XUC was just tacked in on the end, and he is not very good with realizing the state of the game and balance and things. He's just, you know, loves to scream and stuff instead of offering a lot of answers. And it was mostly Jane and Seagull going off of Seagull's video and Seagull's complaints, Jane having some issues with some of the things he said and agreeing with other things, and then expounding on those, and every now and again Surefour would just come in with something that's completely true, and then, you know, they would just move on to something else. And Doomfist is just not that good in top level play. You see Doomfist run with Sombra in order to, you know, get that backline and get those squishies. But even the World Cup, you saw, you know, you saw plenty of people play on Doomfist, but they were not carrying the value that you would see from, you know, a Genji or a Tracer in the Overwatch League, you know, when those characters were meta, or even Pharah at times, which is really good against GOATS, and it worked with Hydration on Team America, and then they took him off of it, and they, you know, got curb stomped by the UK, as we all know. So even pros and coaches and the smartest people in the game still are wrong about a lot in the game, and that does come into play when they are criticizing competitive play, which has kind of come into the foreground of the subject matter of the Overwatch scene right now, is because, you know, Overwatch League is over, so now the pros are, you know, playing that. You know, World Cup is now over, and, you know, there was a lot of space and time between. And it was very, very successful, and a lot of people are playing, and a lot of people are getting better, and meta compositions are starting to form and solidify, especially with GOATS being so easy to run on the surface of it. Executing is obviously completely different, but at the very least, way easier to play than dive tanks were. One of the best things that was brought up in the discussion between those pros, semi-pros, or former pros and coaches was the Reddit thread talking about Seagull's video, where someone said, this is also a matter of balance. People bitch and moan about balancing for the pro scene, and this is what it looks like. If dive is to be non-mandatory in pro play, then it has to be absolute garbage outside of it. If tank comps are to be viable in pro play, they have to be way overpowered in solo queue. And that person is absolutely right. They hit the nail perfectly on the head, and that's something that has really not been talked about much at all when it comes to the disparity between a balance in the game from the pro scene to the pug scene. And one of the things that Jane highlighted as being very underrated, an opinion to have. And there definitely have been those disparities from the beginning of Overwatch League all the way through the end of the World Cup, and right now through this long off season that we're having. They're absolutely right. Dive was meta for so long, but it was terrible outside of pro play. Unless you were in top 500, dive just wouldn't work, because it would require everyone to communicate, which is already going to take out 90% of your games, right? So you know, I'm not saying you have to communicate or you're an asshole, but if you want to get good at the game and if you want to play at high levels, you do have to communicate, and that onus is on you to do so. And with dive, you need to have communication. You need to have every player know their role and how to execute those sort of plans, with the Winston diving in, getting a defense matrix, and the Genji coming in to finish the shot, the Zen getting the discords and calling those off, the Mercy, you know, boosting the right person, or the Tracer, you know, getting the right flank and focusing on the correct characters at the correct time in very boom, 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 quick succession, because it was dive. Everyone would dive on one target. They would go onto the back line, get rid of the Zen, get rid of the Mercy, or a DPS out of position, or a tank that doesn't have any sort of support. So dive is, you know, very, very quick. It needs to have really good communication, and for, like this person said, for dive to be non-mandatory in pro play, it has to be garbage outside of it, because, you know, the way that the pros play, the way that we see in Overwatch League and in the World Cup, is a completely different game than the one that we play. And a lot of people hate that. They're like, I want, you know, more strategy. I want more close games, more competitive games, as opposed to always stomping the enemy team, or getting stomped based off of, you know, the pug RNG-ness of these types of games. In Overwatch, one of the things that people don't really understand is how complicated of a game Overwatch is and how it's very difficult to compare it one-to-one to other games. Yes, it has MOBA aspects of it. Yes, it has FPS aspects of it. But there's really, and you know, you could say that this is most similar to TF2 than anything else. But with the ability-based heroes and the amount of characters that we have with so many different kinds of abilities and the different kinds of objectives that we have, TF2 doesn't compare at all to Overwatch. There are no comparisons to where you can say that the games are played the same way, let alone what sort of characteristics they may or may not share. So that's one of the things that people don't seem to understand when talking about balancing the game of Overwatch, is just how complicated it is. And yes, we want more heroes, and that's going to complicate things because you don't want to add heroes that are garbage, but you don't want them to be meta defining either. You know, we've had that problem with Ana and with Mercy and with Brigitte, and we've kind of always had it, you know, with Reinhardt to some extent. When the game first came out, you needed to have a Reinhardt or you were going to lose, unless the enemy team also didn't have a Reinhardt, and then you're just all shooting at each other with no barrier in between, because Winston wasn't as good and even more complicated in order to play correctly in essence like that, with the way that his shield and movement worked. And we're still at that point right now where Winston is not meta, and it's all about Ryan and how GOATS is so strong, even at mostly only at the top levels of play. You know, if you take a look at how the population is spread out, only the top 4% of players are in GM, you know, or higher, you know, top 500. So you combine PC, PS4, and Xbox, that's if everyone's playing, which is never the case in any game when it comes to a population, you know, copies sold. But if everyone's playing who has a copy of Overwatch, it'll be like probably like 1.6 million people are in the top 4%, which is really the main audience that a lot of YouTube channels cater towards, because, you know, it's just one person or two people or three people or five people making this channel. You know, they all play together or know the same people. They only have GM or top 500 content, you know, maybe some masters on like alt accounts and Smurf accounts and stuff like that. But they only know the game in that aspect, and that's only the top 4% of players, and that's a very, very small percentage of a game whose population really isn't that big. If you take a look at, you know, the other big esport games or competitive games out there like Black Ops or League of Legends or Dota, those other games out there, Overwatch is still kind of a niche market, and which is a testament to how greatly handled Overwatch League was done by Blizzard. But those players in GM and top 500, those are the ones that are making content, and they are kind of sometimes, or maybe I would say most of the time, their idea of the game is kind of skewed based off of their own experiences and or lack of them within the entirety of the game. So a lot of the things kind of get lost or misunderstood whenever they talk about criticisms on the game. Like, for instance, obviously Brigitte is pretty good anywhere. She's not bad, but Brigitte being seen as a constant problem isn't going to be shared across all ELOs and all people. You can ask some people to say Brigitte is super OP, she ruins the game, I'm not going to play while she's there. You'll see those people. You'll also see people that are high, you know, diamond, maybe even masters, who say Symmetra's OP, I hate her, she ruins the game, she's so unbalanced. Some people still feel that way about Mercy. And, you know, Mercy is always going to be a contentious subject. One of the most popular characters when the game was first out, and she wasn't that good, but always saw play, especially with pharmacy combos. And then she gets this change to make her meta-defining. She's the only true meta-defining hero we've had. The only true must-pick. Brigitte is not a must-pick. Reinhardt is not a must-pick. Diva is not a must-pick. Mercy is the only character who has had that moniker. You took a look at her pick rate in the Overwatch League because she was so overpowered and for so long. She can do everything super duper safely without without nearly as much mechanical skill required, and was rewarded so much for it. What with the reses coming out out over and over and over again, and a ton of healing, and a fast charging ult, and a fantastic ult at that. So they started peeling back and peeling back and peeling back, and you always have this backlash. You know, and they had the backlash when she got buffed, if you remember, if you recall. People were like, oh man, 5-man reses, 6-man reses, that's what the game is all about. Then they made her the best character in the history of Overwatch, even to this day, and people were still complaining. Remember the Sombra changes that we most had recently, with the infinite stealth and the infinite translocator. All of the pro Sombra players were like, this is terrible, don't do this. A bunch of you know, high-level players were like, oh, this makes Sombra so much worse, don't do this. And then they did push it through the PTR to the live game client, and now she's the only meta DPS in the game. Like, she's insane right now. It's so hard to counter, way more impactful than Doomfist, way harder to kill, harder to counter, harder to track, harder to scout for. And she's I would say, the only meta DPS character right now. Widow isn't. Tracer hasn't been meta for a long time. And there are still people to this day, including pro players and former pro players, who say that Tracer's OP and needs to be taken out of the game. She was kind of the first character that was given that treatment before Brigitte. So many people thought Tracer's overpowered, Tracer's overpowered, Tracer's overpowered, and she's only gotten one change throughout the entire game, and that was a nerf to her ultimate, which is still the hardest ultimate to use in the entire game, and it's not the fastest charging, and you're not going to get multi kills out of it 95% of the time. And still, that was the thing that they nerfed from Tracer. Riptire charges way faster, has a much bigger explosion radius. Yes, it can be destroyed, but Tracer, if she doesn't stick with her pulse bomb, she's not getting anything 99% of the time. He charges it faster, it's easier to hit, you're gonna get multiple kills out of it, and you can see this from Bronze, and you saw it all the way through the Overwatch League and top 500 play. But for some reason, Tracer's was deemed too powerful that it needed to be nerfed. I'm not saying Riptire needs to be nerfed, but it's odd that they would nerf something so much weaker that charges slower, that is way less impactful. And Tracer was meta for such a long time in Overwatch League, right? And then she wasn't seen at all. You know, she wasn't there to challenge those Widows that had, you know, started to take over that main DPS role when the dive comp was still going on. But Tracer disappeared. And it wasn't because she was nerfed, it was because the meta changed, and she's still gone. A lot of people credit that to Brigitte's existence is just too threatening to a Tracer to do anything. The Brigitte doesn't even have to do anything, it's just her mere presence is enough to deter a Tracer pick, and so many people say that to pick Tracer against a team that has Brig is literally throwing, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration because you're not using that word right. You know, terms like throwing and toxic are tossed around so much that people have kind of lost the true definition of those words. But Tracer, people still think she's OP even though she's not meta. And so, you know, there's a lot of discrepancies when it comes to the way that so many people critique the game. Brigitte isn't a must pick like Mercy was, and there wasn't nearly as much of a backlash against the Mercy meta, even though that lasted for almost a year. And Brig has gotten, like, I think 8 nerfs by now, and she's going to get 4 more in the next PTR. So she's only gotten nerfed. And people are still going to be salty about it, even when her shield bash does no damage. She can't, quote-unquote, one-shot combo, even though it takes 3 or 4 inputs in order to do this combo. Will no longer be able to kill even the squishiest target in the game, Tracer. But that's still not going to be enough for people. People think that either Brig needs to be deleted, hence the Brig delete movement, or she shouldn't be able to stun, and she shouldn't have a shield, and she shouldn't have a mace. There are some people who truly believe these things about Brig. So like, there's way too much stun in the game. It's so hard being Reinhardt. It's like, hard being Reinhardt? He's the best tank in the game. What do you mean things are hard for Reinhardt? He's, throughout the history of Overwatch, been the best tank and the most important character, because your main tank is your most important role within Overwatch. And with triple tank and GOATS and the usage of Zarya, putting Reinhardt as a mainstay in so many different comps, in so many different maps and objectives, it's kind of hard. Yes, there are a lot of stuns in the game, more so than there were at the game at launch, but people complaining about, oh, this doesn't kill anyone in the game because Brigitte has rally. It's like, that's an ultimate. That's an ultimate. That's not going to be in every fight. And then people started going the other way. It's like, oh, now that Molten Core has been changed, that's going to completely counter Brigitte. No, it's not, because that's just an ultimate. So people are taking really broad strokes at the macro cosm of the game instead of really seeing, yes, there are problems within Overwatch, and especially within matchmaking. Solo queue is a mess. People aren't playing coordinated, but they're always putting the blame on Blizzard. They're putting the blame on balance. But with the type of game that Overwatch is, and the fact that, like with the tank idea that, you know, dive to be non-mandatory in pro play has to be garbage, and for tank comps to be viable in pro play, they have to be way overpowered in solo queue. That's absolutely always going to be true. And you know, playing triple tank is so much easier to play in solo queue, in comp and random pug games than dive ever was, because it's so much easier to execute as an idea and requires less crucial types of communication. But along with that and the intricacies of Overwatch, I don't think it will ever be seen as in the right place by the majority of the vocal players online, especially the high level ones who are frustrated with the way that ranked works right now, because honestly, they don't put enough onus on the player. Like a game that has a lot of overpowered things. Take a look at like Call of Duty, for example. A lot of the problems in that game have to do with the design and balancing of things within that game. It's so much easier to fine-tune something without having large ramifications on the metagame as a whole by nerfing damage or fall off or the charge rate of this or this blocking off this part of the map for free without having to do anything. Overwatch doesn't have that type of balance within their game. Because of, it's a lot of it is power based, and a lot of pros out there they just like just delete Brig and D.Va from the game so hitscan can rule everything. There's people that unabashedly wish that for the game, and that just wouldn't be Overwatch. There are people that just want to dive non-stop and not have to worry about a backline being defended. People want to be able to dive on a Zen or an Ana for free without a Brigitte being there to peel. People want the backline to be free reign as they were in the dive meta, where Genjis and Tracers can just run free. Not to say that I think Genjis and Tracers should be out of the meta altogether. I think there can and always will be a place for them because of mobility is always such a big thing in games when it comes to especially the highest levels of play, because of just how much movement and speed and decision making can be made with those types of abilities. But people have such a hard problem with Brigitte because something in the game isn't automatic anymore. And I don't think those people will be pleased unless she is non-meta. And they're like, oh, she's too easy, where no one made that argument against Mercy when she was way more meta of a character than Brigitte ever will be. And the fact that Brigitte does take more skill, is more involved in the fights, and has had so many nerfs to bring her down to earth. And yeah, some of them were definitely good for the game as a whole. You know, it hurts some people more than it helps others. But for the health of the game as a whole, a lot of those nerfs, in retrospect, were good for the game, because, you know, this was even pre-GOATS being a thing. So, and a lot of that Blizzard, people don't give Blizzard enough credit with the task that is handled to them and how good they've handled things so far. People say that, oh, Blizzard doesn't play their own games. Blizzard, I think, is one of the few companies where you actually can't say that about, where there isn't inherently at all levels of play a glaring problem that can be easily fixed in something like a Call of Duty. where if you just played those games, you could easily see some of those problems. Overwatch doesn't have that. And when it comes to people creating ideas like, we can balance the game like this, or maybe like this, or maybe like this, and then the Blizzard team comes out with something completely different that nobody suggested, and it's actually the better answer. Sometimes it'll take a couple of tries, but Blizzard has a huge task ahead of them in making this game fun for so many different heroes within so many different roles, where it's not just tank, DPS, healer. You have off healer, main tank, off tank, and you have your different kinds of damage characters where there's so few tanks right now, there's so few healers, and Blizzard knows this. We know that Jeff Kaplan said we're working on a bunch of tanks right now and a bunch of healers because we know we have to get that up. So Blizzard is aware of a lot of their problems, and none of us know how the back end of making and coding this game works. You know, it makes sense that something like Doomfist Punch would be super buggy, and you know, it still isn't perfect, but it has made improvements. But you can see why an ability like that or Seismic Slam would have so many different variables within it that it can't be perfect, especially straight out of the gate or even after some changes and some testing. And people really love to shit on Hammer Down, even though that has so many changes from the ground up that people don't give credit for. But also Blizzard always seems to... some people say they don't work fast enough, they don't release enough characters, they don't release enough patches, they don't get experimental enough. And some of that might be true in certain circumstances. Of course, we'll never know because we don't see the builds of the game that they play test within just themselves, and the kind of ideas that they throw away that they don't tell us about. And we even don't get to see the ideas that they do tell us that they threw away. But I think we should be able to trust them that they know what they're doing, because they've come up with solutions that have been really helpful and made the game a lot more healthy, such as, like, remember, ult charges used to charge a lot faster, and you know, after a few months, all ult charges were slowed down, and ults are still a big thing. That's one of the things that Siegel mentioned in the video, that ults are so strong to him, and the game kind of is predicated on who has the most Qs. They just automatically win the game. And he talks about snowballing, which I think is completely off base about, like, where he says the team that wins the first point of King of the Hill wins 64% of the time. Statistically, that's awesome. That's really good. That's the way that it should be. That's not too much. You gain you know, a 14% increase in your odds, and minus 14 obviously for the enemy team. So that's a 28% swing for winning the first fight. Statistically, that's awesome. It should put, if it was like 80%, yeah, that would be, of course, ridiculous. But if that was only like 10% or 15%, that would also be ridiculous on the other side of things. So I think he's way off base on that, and Jane was trying to make that point to him, although he didn't get a lot into the specifics when it comes into the stats and things like that. But Blizzard has made a lot of good changes, and you can say that they haven't done enough, but we don't know what it's like back there. And obviously they are earmarking a lot of things toward the future because they already have Hero 30 ready to go. And so they're balancing everything kind of all at once because they're always thinking ahead of the game. And we have more tanks and more healers to come. And I think, if anything, that has the best opportunity to balance the game, is more tanks, especially main tanks, because right now we only have 3 and only one of them is really, really good in the meta right now. And another one of them is just not usable right now with Orisa. Even in the Overwatch League, there's only 2 map instances where you saw Orisa consistently. And so we need more main tanks, we need more healers of all kinds, and I think along with that, we will see much more balance possible within the game. And another thing is, up till this point, the meta has always been one composition, right? It was all dive, right? And then it was it was all triple tank with Ana, right? And then it was all dive. And now we have, like, we have GOATS, but that's countered by dive, which is countered by anti-dive, which is countered by GOATS, which is, people are saying, oh, it's a rock, paper, scissors thing. That's what you guys were asking for 2 years ago. We're like, it'd be great if we had, like, 3 or 4 comps that kind of all just countered each other instead of the same thing over and over again. So for a lot of people, nothing will be good enough because they just like to complain. And a lot of people don't realize that a game can't be perfect because everyone's going to have their own opinions. And there's a lot of different roles within the game to see. People take way too much emphasis on killing and damage, where Sureforce said, I think nailed it right on the head, that Overwatch is much more about not dying than getting kills. And I think triple tank and goats and moats and mountain goats and all that stuff has shown that that is the most best thing. People a lot of times in my matchmaking games will say, we need more damage. No, that's never the problem. There will always be enough damage. It's all about focus fire, communication, coordinating your ults together, and winning team fights. And when it comes to, you know, the top 3 or 4%, they have their issues with the game. And yes, there are problems with, you know, not being able to play with teams, having small user bases, and you know, SR brackets that we can match make with, as well as, you know, Smurf accounts and people who are throwing on purpose. Even in top 500, people are just suiciding off of maps and stuff like that. So there will always be things that will not be balanced, because people will always be throwing. People will always be flaming. People will always not communicate. And that's something that Blizzard and the Overwatch team can't have control over, is the people, the players. The players have more control over the game than people give them credit for, because they always want to blame, you know, the big corporation that makes a bunch of money, right? And call them lazy, when that couldn't be further from the truth from a team like Blizzard, and especially the Overwatch team, which has had so much constant work for the past 3 years. And, you know, and then obviously you have pre-development in there as well. So I think a lot of pro players, a lot of big YouTube channels are missing the mark on what they think the problems are in this game, not providing the right kind of answers and alternatives to these supposed problems, and not looking at the game in the right way, where, you know, they come from the pro scene, going to matchmaking. Matchmaking definitely does have problems, and it always will, and some of those have been made better, and some of them will be better in the future. When it comes to different kinds of matchmaking services, people often just don't even talk about quick play. One of the reasons why comp is so bad is because quick play is just a garbage fest, right? If you play a quick play, that's 6 DPS versus 6 DPS. So, you know, comp, yeah, is quick play plus, because it's just a bunch of people going me, 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 and I'm never the problem, someone else is the problem, while not paying attention to how the game is actually should work and the way that they're actually playing, because quick play is just the same but worse. I'll be in a Mystery Heroes game, and sometimes I'll see way more team coordination than I'll see in quick play, or even a lot of competitive games when it comes to characters that are chosen, or playing with their team, or peeling, or things like that. So a lot of complaints from some of the best players and content creators out there, I think, are missing the mark by a lot, by just saying, Brigitte's the problem. Take her out of the game. Give her shield 4 health and not allow her to stun, and have her do no damage and no healing, and take armor out of the game. You know, those kinds of things are not the right idea for balancing Overwatch, for making it more fun, making it more accessible, or for bronze players, or for the Overwatch League and World Cup pro scene. So those are just my thoughts on their thoughts of other people's thoughts.